Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Building Value and Innovation Ecosystem video conversation series. I'm really excited to have both Sarah and Todd with me here from the University in Industry Innovation Network. Sarah, Todd, thanks for joining us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves, your roles, and tell us what the UIIN does.
My name is Sarah Jabber. I'm a director at UIIN. Um, my role focuses on, I do a lot around business development and looking after our community. So maybe to give a bit of context, UIN, we are a global organization that is focused on university industry collaboration and all that it encompasses, whether that's partnerships, entrepreneurship, commercialization, impact. And when we talk about engagement, it's really thinking about universities interacting with any external stakeholder that is not a university. We've been around just over 13 years now. Maybe Todd can build a bit on the origin story, but essentially what we do is we conduct research on this topic. So we undertake a lot of research projects along these themes that I just mentioned, and we convert a lot of that knowledge back into both insights, so written content, podcasts, as well as events, both online and on-site, that we deliver back to our community. And our community is made up of more than 120 organizations from around the world, encompassing universities, different sizes and shapes, as well as some companies and some smaller intermediary organizations as well. And in addition to the research, insights, and event, we also deliver services in the forms of training and consulting, which we can maybe elaborate on as we go through the discussion.
I'm Todd Davey. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship at the Institute in Telecom Business School, as well as wearing another hat, which is the associate partner at UIIN. As Sarah mentioned, UIIN has now a long history. It's 13 years in the development, and I guess it started out from a need. And I think that's where all good businesses start, is from a need to talk a little bit about how universities can evolve, where they're failing, and it started with a conference on entrepreneurial universities originally, and it basically evolved from there. And I guess UIN has been filling the gaps in the discussion around universities, and I'm really trying to engender more of a conversation around how universities can impact our societies better, how we can, work together more wholeheartedly with industry. What are some of the things that we could do together to increase student employability, but as well as that, to make research more relevant. So I think there's a lot of touch points that we can pick up in our conversation.
Yeah, and I'm really excited. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about the role of universities in innovation ecosystems. Like you mentioned, obviously there is a need, and there is a lot of, universities are sort of the hub of new ideas, innovation, and activity. So let's talk about that a little bit. We typically we found that obviously universities are often seen as catalysts for innovation. Yet, many of them struggle to translate research into real world impact. According to you and your organization and the research and the work that you've done, what do you believe are the most significant barriers preventing effective university industry collaboration?
I guess just picking up your point about the roles of the university, we actually were very frustrated with the lack of conversation around what the future of universities look like. So we decided to undertake an initiative ourselves, collecting insights from leaders globally. So from university, from industry, entrepreneurial leaders, student leaders, and we brought these insights together in a form of a number of books. But what we identified was that there's a specific number of roles that kept coming up. And so we identified roles such as the talent engine. So, in other words, that universities have this role of producing talent for whether it's industry or future work. Could be in government, could be in industry. The role of the life partner, which is basically accompanying people throughout their entire career, so not just early in their career, but also then revisiting, rebuilding after a loss of job, or creating a new tangent for somebody to go in a different direction, and supporting them through that process. So reinventing their career, I guess. There was a discovery role, so there was an enhanced role that universities can play in solving societal problems. We also had two other roles which were around more entrepreneurial roles, and also regional development roles, such as the launchpad role, which was about actually launching new enterprise, whether it's academics or students or whatever else it was. But also the fifth one was around regional development, and more like being the lounge room for a region. In other words, it being an anchor tenant for the innovation activities of a region. And I guess they were the five roles that we identified. But our work also leans into identifying things such as barriers and drivers. And some of the biggest barriers that we have seen on both sides is that just this. I guess it's this mismatch between, I guess, the two environments. Whether it's we look at industry and universities, and we see a real mismatch in terms of their objectives. So the aims of each of the institutions, the timeframes that we work upon, the communication mechanisms, and even the language that we have, risk profiles. So we see a mismatch in these sort of areas, and what that often means is there are substantial barriers on both sides, just in the way that they naturally or don't naturally interact, and the fact that we have to then find ways of supporting them. Within the university environment, there tends to be a lot of bureaucracy that affects obviously the industry partner, but also for the academic themselves, it can be quite insurmountable in some ways. It can really prevent the activity from going ahead. So whatever it is, whether it's research or collaboration in education or regional development, solving societal problems, whatever it is, bureaucracy tends to be a barrier. I guess it's also the lack of alignment of the academics' career path. So it actually, they're not rewarded for doing that activity. In fact, it takes away from things they are rewarded for. And on the industry side, there tends to be just they see more cultural mismatches in terms of the type of barriers that they face. Can be funding, but it can, as much as anything, just be these mismatches. And I guess there's a number of ways that we have explored to overcome those, and that's something. Yeah, that's something Sarah could probably talk a lot to as well. So
think we can talk about challenges the whole session. So maybe better to talk about more on solutions.
Help us understand. Obviously there are quite a few barriers there, although not insurmountable. So help us understand, how do you reconcile some of these differences and challenges, the ones that Todd mentioned?
Yeah, sure. Maybe to start, actually, I think the first one Todd said was misalignment, and we often see that can be one of the biggest problems is that from the start of, let's say, a collaboration, you're not actually talking about what is it that we both want to achieve, what are our maybe not even longer term goals, but what is the desired outcome? How will we actually do this? And kind of having those discussions upfront. So this sounds really basic probably, but one of the things we often talk about is communication and the importance of having these discussions at an early stage, starting small, not immediately wanting to jump into a long-term, really high investment type of collaboration or partnership, but really just kind of testing the waters, getting to know each other. We, yeah, I mean, it's also a little bit of a cliche, but we often also say it's like, two people or a group of people getting to know each other. You kind of need to go through this initiation phase, getting to really understand each other's objectives, what are you looking for, and then as you deepen that relationship, you can start to embed it deeper and do more together. But maybe to also differentiate between this is kind of overcoming those barriers on the relationship side and the actual collaboration. But Todd talked about structural and maybe cultural barriers. And those are, at least what we see, it just a little bit more challenging because, you need the right support structures in order to enable whether it's partnerships or entrepreneurship, spin out creation. We can talk a bit more about that if you want. But whether it's the people, some we call them boundary standards, the people who operate on, the intersection between academia and industry, helping, you know, get things going or helping manage and oversee the processes, um, reward systems in place, recognition, um, how is the funding managed and distributed, kind of breaking down some of those silos that can exist not just in universities, also in companies. Companies can also be very siloed and bureaucratic. So creating, more streamlined processes and those support structures can help enable these collaborations to be more effective.
Um, we have found through our work that focusing on the barriers, it's useful to try to reduce them or eliminate them if you can, but actually it's probably more productive to focus on the things that unite the two parties. So in other words, what are they trying to get out of it? What is the motivation that is driving the desire to want to collaborate? So whether it's access to talent, or if it's creating new products and services from the research, or on the academic side, is it contributing to their research? Is it giving them new insights and things like that? So really focusing on the commonalities can be a great place to make these relationships that Sarah mentioned.
So, building on that, can you share some examples that you've seen of effective university industry collaboration where that alignment, the matching, like all the elements kind of came together?
The case on a very high level is obviously Siemens. So it's a large organisation that was collaborating together with the Technical University of Munich. Now they, over a number of years, they developed quite a basis of trust in order to be able to create the sort of collaboration that they were looking for. It didn't necessarily just start with a strategic level collaboration to start with. They had some researchers that were working together with some researchers on the Siemens side. They built a relationship, and from there, they started to recruit some of the candidates from Technical University of Munich into their organisation, and so you had this almost flow through from the university environment into Siemens. They created a collaborative laboratory on the campus at Technical University of Munich, and over a period of time, it became a strategic partnership for Siemens, and also for the university. But if I had to pick an example that's perhaps more like a medium-sized enterprise or small to medium-sized enterprise, I think Dairy Crest is an example that I could probably draw upon. They started collaborating together with Sarah. Maybe you could remind me of the university.
Harper Adams
Harper Adams, that's
University.
it. Yep. So they started just with a very small collaborative research project together. It was a consulting project. The two researchers on either side started to get to know each other and liked each other, and so let's maybe think about another project. But in doing so, the business Dairy Crest, which is a dairy company out of the UK, basically identified that actually they're providing some real value here in terms of the research and the other capabilities they had within the university. They saw potentially could lead to the development of a new stream of research and a new stream of product development that they hadn't considered. So it just bit by bit, they just kept collaborating, and again, same sort of thing happened where they recruited students from within the from the university or the graduates that were coming out of the university. Did a bunch of other things like collaborative challenges, and eventually they created a research centre as well together on campus. And that's a major avenue for new product development for Dairy Crest these days. So I guess they're two examples that they're somewhat different, but they show a general trend of the ones that we see work best, which is starting with some sort of relationship and building upon that in order to be able to create this sort of value.
So yeah, like the starting small and maybe not needing to involve so many people, but as the relationship starts to develop and both sides start to see the potential for more, making sure to then bring in the right people, because at the end of the day, especially with these longer term or bigger scale partnerships, you do need senior leadership involvement on both sides, because it requires, thinking a bit longer term. It requires resources. So that kind of comes in a little. Usually, again, this is like a bit of a typical pathway. They can go in all directions, as we know, but kind of bringing that in as needed.
It sounds like it's very much like a slow burn. It starts with research, publications, things that kind of universities and are generally used to, and then from there finding the right partner on the other side and continuing to build that relationship step by step.
And maybe if you want to use an analogy, it's kind of like a marriage. It starts with the initial interactions, and slowly but surely it builds over time. But I think the most productive relationships that we've seen has been multilateral. So it's not just about specifically joint R&D. It's often then involving some sort of uh, it's not just knowledge exchange, but it could also be talent pipeline that the university can offer to the industry partner. So in terms of recruitment, it can be quite productive there, but also other activities that they might do together, such as those challenges and things like that that we can undertake.
And some of the typical sort of deliverables at universities, or when you think about tech transfer institution, which are supposed to be sort of the hotbeds of innovation and um, the germination for university industry collaboration, a lot of them kind of focus on prioritizing patents and licensing. When we think about commercialization with the new models of spin-outs and startups, should we be rethinking what successful commercialization means on university campuses? Todd, I'm quite curious about your thoughts, your perspective on this, given that you've been on the university campus and have worked on both sides of.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's. I mean, it's widely known by those that have been investing resources into developing spin outs from universities, as well as especially the recent focus on deep tech. That when it comes to developing these I guess effectively they're startups, but we call them spin outs. There's some significant challenges, and it's not least that the development time for research. So just because you have a research discovery, it might take another 5, 10, even sometimes 15 years to develop it into something is usable and practical. And so, that development time is quite long. There's other challenges such as, you don't necessarily want the academic who's got fantastic skills in science. You don't necessarily want them as your CEO. So therefore, you also have to find somebody who can work together with the academic lead lead researcher, and so you would have to find somebody external. Perhaps it's a PhD student that has a good relationship already. Ideally, that's something we've seen that can work quite successfully. But trying to bring in another CEO that is unrelated or doesn't have the relationship already can be a bit problematic. So yeah, it can. There's a number of challenges. There are two of them. There are many. There can also be issues around intellectual property, and we often find that universities tend to overprotect in some ways. Sometimes make it very complex to be able to to use it. Sometimes they're asking for a big percentage that makes it not that interesting for venture capital to get involved. So there's issues around intellectual property as well. When it comes to startups, it's a little bit different because obviously the intellectual property is not owned by the university or not managed by the university. It's usually the individual students' intellectual property. Now, often what you find, especially if it's students or graduates, as they come out of the university environment, they often just lack the experience, which is quite natural. You know, they haven't been out in the world. They haven't necessarily experienced work life. They haven't necessarily experienced challenges firsthand, and that can be quite challenging for the startup concepts coming out of a university environment. I think one of the most productive things we can do as a university is actually have a broader remit or broader understanding of what entrepreneurship is at a university. So not necessarily focused on creating startups, but actually creating entrepreneurial mindsets. And there's been a lot of work that's been done around entrepreneurial mindsets and what are the sort of skills, attributes, and behaviours that contribute to that. And in many respects, it aligns very much with the growth mindset. So that's something else that you might have, a concept that you might also understand. And it's something that universities and graduates these days are, especially when it comes to the jobs of tomorrow and the future skills that are going to be required. Entrepreneurial capabilities, the ability to adapt, the ability to make something from nothing, the ability to see opportunities and things like that, as well as have a creativity skills that are really in demand. And so actually building this capability of entrepreneurial mindset, acting, thinking, can be quite. I guess that should be the pro. But I guess that's my personal opinion. But that's what I think the focus should be for universities is putting students through this process of entrepreneurship, helping them to develop those skills, and then maybe a startup comes out of it now. Maybe it's in 5, 10, 15 years when they've got experience. Maybe it's within a big company. Maybe it's within a small company. It could be any of those outcomes. So I guess there's some of the challenges with both startups and spin-outs, and also just the positioning that I'd see as being relevant for a university.
We also, well, you asked about commercialization, focus quite a bit on like startups, spin-outs, but another, I think it's also important to talk about terminology and something we've been actually has been coming up more in Europe is the term valorization, which comes from French, and it's around creating value out of research. And that value could be commercial value, therefore commercialization, but it could also be a social impact or other types of impact. So that connection as well to creation of impact is really important, and it resonates a lot more with researchers, with academics, because in the end, that's why they do research, because they want to create impact. And for some of them, the commercial pathway is the avenue that they will undertake. But for many of them, it's around helping them understand that, the work that you're doing, as long as it's making its way out of the university in some form that is not a publication, is actually, impact, and you are creating value through that.
I love that concept. I don't think we've heard it be articulated so well in the past. So I really appreciate you sharing that perspective. So sticking with that a little bit in terms of research and the funding it takes and how long the runway is. Obviously we know that most spin-outs and startups from universities they go through the valley of death, right? The funding gap between research funding and market viability. So, through your work at the UIIN, what models or policies have you seen that effectively bridge this gap?
I guess we've seen a number of approaches towards this. One more recently has been the development of studios that actually support specifically to bring together university intellectual property together with, let's say, founders together with the professor or the lead researcher, and try to create their own startup companies rather than seeking out finance and then having that valley of death where you don't have any funding. They're actually trying to create these venture studios within universities. I've seen that approach taken a number of times. University of Texas, for example, that can be quite effective. Other institutions have taken different approaches. Some have embarked on getting academics to go through a set of training. So, what is this process? That's something that UIN also offer. Is a training program to support academics to understand more concretely what is expected, what sort of skills are required, what sort of process you're going to go through. So a little bit of expectation management as well. That can be relatively effective. So that they're just two suggestions that we've seen. There's obviously acceleration pathways that exist now as well. Often the accelerator is not necessarily part of the university context. It's often offered by either funded a funding organisation, or it's offered by a accelerator that's been created by using funds that are available from the government, for example. So they can then support the scientific researcher through that 1-2 year process that it might take to convert their research into something more concrete. So I guess they're the major ways that I've seen this this specific challenge be approached. And I think in terms of the success rates, I think it's a combination of all of those sort of approaches that might be needed. For students, it's there are some elite universities who have developed a really full end-to-end pipeline of ideas all the way to growth and beyond. Technical University of Munich has done that through their program and their external spin-out company they've created, which is called Unternehmertum. And that's an end-to-end program, but you have to have the sort of resources that are not available to most universities to do that. So I guess what is realistic for most universities is to work more on that early stage. So developing entrepreneurial mindsets, getting students involved in hackathons and challenges, pitching competitions, but then into pre-incubation and then incubation programs rather than acceleration type programs. That seems to be more realistic, and ideally, if the university can provide pathways for the students to go through rather than just independent ad hoc programs that exist. If you can provide them more in a pathway to support the different ventures through that process, that tends to be more successful as well.
Uh, so I think you mentioned a couple of things around, generally most universities don't have the resources and the kind of financial firepower that is needed to build full blown out ecosystems like the one you see at TUM, but also you see one of those at MIT here in the US. So let's talk a little bit about that aspect of university industry innovation and collaboration. Government funding, that's another really important source of funds and finances. So when you do you think it's being allocated in the right way? What do you think needs to change, or what is the one thing you'd like to change about how public funding is considered in supporting university innovation, and how it's used in university industry collaboration?
So I can talk about maybe a couple of things. I think public, at least from my understanding or my perspective, um, there's a lot of public funding that's going to research, which is great, but less so towards more innovation or engagement related activities. And in the context of, let's say, even thinking about a basic collaboration, that it takes a lot of time to get it to that stage. For example, from some of the examples we've described, where you're actually generating impact, there's resources flowing between both parties, and there is no funding for that early phase of relationship development. And sometimes there's no tangible outcome because it might take you 2 years before you align on something. This is maybe exaggerating, but there aren't many mechanisms that support some of those earlier phases. But maybe thinking not just about the actual funding going into supporting a collaboration or supporting, let's say, innovation. I think universities all sometimes try to do everything all at once. For example, every university wants to have their own tech transfer office, their own partnership office, their own career center, their own incubator. So we're seeing some examples of, I think, especially in the UK, you're seeing these shared TTO concepts, and that's largely driven by government funding, or is supporting that, where it's kind of a shared TTO for the region, not necessarily for one university, but for multiple. So I think more mechanisms like this can also play a role, where you're not just funding specific projects, but you're actually funding the structures and the support mechanisms to enable universities to do more with the resources that they do have access to.
And maybe if I could just add an extra layer on that. And I totally agree with what Sarah said, because we did a study for the European Commission in 2011 and then again in 2018, and looking at university industry collaboration in Europe. And one of the major recommendations that we gave was dedicated funding for developing relationships rather than just, you know, a one-off collaboration. So I guess the relationship development aspect, I think, is really undersold. And again, I don't think we should take away from the funding that's dedicated just purely for research. I think we should have extra extra funding that is dedicated to more this relationship development, and it can be on a regional level. It can also be just between two partners. We're seeing increasingly multilateral partnerships, so not just one to one, but one to many, or many to many. So those are the sort of things that I think should receive funding. But as Sarah said, just developing that early stage research collaboration. And then perhaps one other thing that I would add is that currently there are very few career pathways for the boundary spanners that Sarah mentioned earlier. So in other words, if you want to work on the edge of a university, you kind of don't have a career pathway. And I think that that's problematic for keeping good people, for people who understand both industry and scientific work. I mean, we need to retain them. We need to, provide them with good careers in order to, to get the most out of them, and to be able to support this process wholeheartedly. And I think that is an area that also government could look at funding, is making sure that there's funds available, and then maybe having an initiative around the creating a career pathway for boundary boundary standards. I think that would be really useful as well.
We talked a little bit about, there's lots of universities, and everybody, as you mentioned, Sarah, everybody's trying to build their own tech transfer office, their own incubator, their own studio. How, as if there's an aspiring entrepreneur, if somebody sort of is entrepreneur at large, and they want to work with university-based IP, how can they identify? Are there ways that they can identify whether an institution is truly innovation friendly, or are they just paying lip service to entrepreneurship and innovation? Are there any commonalities that you find within some of the most innovative and impactful university industry sort of environments?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, and maybe it's a very simplistic view, but if you go to a university website and it takes you more than a few minutes to find any information about, as an external organization, whether I'm a startup or a company, how to engage with that university, or what they do in this space, or who to contact, and like an actual person, not a generic email address, then that to me is already a good sign that maybe they're not doing it very well, but they're at least trying and enhancing that visibility. Because the number of universities websites that takes you down complete rabbit holes and you find absolutely no information that you're looking for, there are a few too many, unfortunately.
I think you're absolutely spot on, Sarah. We've seen it often, but I think one of the challenges is that intellectual property by itself isn't necessarily going to be that useful, because often there needs to be some sort of further development of the intellectual property. There needs to be somebody who actually understands the intellectual property. So inevitably, just picking some IP off the shelf is going to be problematic at times. And I guess that's why, when I mentioned previously some of the models that universities are starting to try, why they might be more productive in terms of getting intellectual property outside the university. So either it's the model of supporting the academic the lead researcher to develop a startup on their own, or to find productive ways of rather than pulling them out of the research into a startup. Maybe we should just be, if they're good at research, let's keep them in the research, but let's try and find um, an entrepreneur or somebody that can work with them to actually create the venture themselves. So I think there's a lot more work that has been focused in this area. So actually just trying to build relationships even in this context, rather than expect the university just hand over some IP, because that can, as I said, for a number of reasons, that can be problematic.
So I know we're almost at time, but I'd love to give you both the space to tell us a little bit about the conference. We can see that it's on the 10th to the 12th of June in Amsterdam. Tell us a little bit about what we expect, how to register, what are the sort of key themes that you're going to talk about this year to the audience, please.
The UIIN conference, it's one of the largest events globally dedicated to university industry collaboration. We generally get around 450 delegates from all over the world, mostly practitioners who kind of are operating in the space. The theme of this year's conference is reimagining universities for talent, innovation, and impact. So very aligned to what we've been discussing today. And our conference is one of our main aims of it isn't just for people to come and present and then go off and tick the box that they presented at a conference, but it's really around knowledge sharing and networking. So it's a very open environment. People are very happy to share what they're doing. We've heard so many examples of people who met each other at the conference, then gone off and collaborated, or formed this like community of practice that they still connect with each other. I'm biased, but I do highly recommend our conference. So yeah, this year it's taking place from the 10th to 12th of June in Amsterdam. You can visit our website, uiin.org /conference. But if you go to events, we also run a lot of online events that people can access from anywhere in the world. And we have a lot more information on our content, our insights, and some of our training that Todd mentioned.
So relatedly, I have one sort of final thought experiment kind of question, and I think it's quite relevant to the theme of your conference for this year. If you, Sarah, why don't you start us off, and then Todd, you can share your perspective as well. But if you could design an entirely new university from scratch, one that's optimized for all the things we've talked about, innovation, entrepreneurship, and industry collaboration, what would it look like?
I'm really happy I get to answer this before Todd, because I have a feeling we'd probably say some similar stuff. Um, but probably, I think one of the main things for me would be like not having any, like a university without walls. So no faculties, no disparate or discrete offices, but maybe rather thinking about maybe aligned on missions, or we're all trying to achieve maybe we have a certain purpose, and some people do research on this topic, some people teach on this topic, some people support the innovation or the translation of the knowledge that's coming out of that work that they're doing. So I think breaking the silos, and then breaking down this concept that we're all separate, but finding a way to just be fluid and working all together.
Yeah, and to layer on top of that, because I totally agree with all of that, is that I'd probably start the university together with industry partners, local government, perhaps, depending on the theme for your university. I would make sure that the work that you're doing is all challenge based. So instead of first starting with the subject material, I would actually start with, okay, what is the challenge that we're going to get the students to complete? okay, if we're doing engineering and it's related to engineering, then we're going to build a car, for example. Okay, that's going to be a car prototype in 3 years. So what are we going to need to be able to do that? What sort of subjects are we going to need? What sort of partners are we going to need? And how could we productively actually create that car prototype? What knowledge do we need? Yeah, it's all those sort of things. So I'd organise the entire curriculum around these specific challenges, and I'd bring in the partners that you need to be able to achieve that challenge. That enables you to be able to, for students to be able to work with industry partners at the same time, learn from them, be mentored by them. Perhaps that ends up that they start to work for that company at the end of their studies. So yeah, I just reorganised the entire curriculum around that sort of approach.
That's an exciting and bold vision. Thank you both for being with us today, Sarah and Todd. Really appreciated all your perspectives and insights and really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much. We really enjoyed it.
This is fun. And I'm sure folks who will attend your conference next month will, I'm sure, learn a lot more about this conversation, and hopefully we'll see you there as well. Thanks a lot.